Welcome to the AEC Hive podcast, where we're talking about innovation in the architecture, engineering, and construction sector. I'm Ralph Montague, a director at ArcDocs, and I'm joined by my fellow co-founder of AEC Hive, John Egan from BIM Launcher. John, do you want to just say a quick hi to everyone?
Hi, everyone. John Egan from BIM Launcher here. I'm looking forward to another podcast.
Excellent. So we're very excited today to be down south to Australia and meeting with Gavin Crump, who is the founder of the Aussie BIM Guru. And we're really excited to have you here, Gavin. Do you want to introduce yourself and just give us a little bit of a background of your company, what you're doing?
Yeah, certainly. So I guess g'day to everyone listening. Thanks for having me on board. Great to be here. So I guess my name's Gavin. Some of you might know me through my YouTube ventures as the Aussie BIM Guru, where I share some tutorials on Revit and Dynamo, Navisworks, and all sorts of other programs. But I guess some of you might know me from what I do in Australia, which is typically for the last 10 years I've been working in BIM. So I started off working on a large-scale hospital project in my hometown of Adelaide in South Australia, and worked my way up as a BIM technician with an architectural background. So I studied up to a master's, and then so I went from a BIM technician, and then I moved around a few offices until I moved to Sydney, where I came up to the role of BIM manager. And then I've sort of jumped between BIM coordination and BIM management roles since then, and sort of gained a bit of a thirst for helping more types of people through that, which led me to launch my BIM consulting firm, which is called BIM Guru. So I launched that in January of this year. So a lot of opportunities that have come to me, and I'm really enjoying just working with all things BIM and all things AEC. So I'm really looking forward to having a chat in today's podcast.
Yeah, so John and I launched this AEC Hive initiative because we had a general feeling that innovation in the AEC sector just wasn't moving as quickly as we felt it should. It seemed like even though we had these fantastic technologies and ways of doing things, that in general the sector was not embracing those things and just sort of plowing on with working in traditional ways.
So,
is that your sense? What's the scene in Australia?
Yeah, I definitely agree that whilst there's a lot of great ideas sort of buried underneath the weight of the AEC industry and its inertia that sort of carries it forward, it's not necessarily shared around as often as it could be, or sometimes it's stored away in mental silos where people can't access it. So a big part of what I did was trying to sort of open up some of those silos and connect more people together through such networks as LinkedIn and YouTube and Twitter. And I'm seeing a lot of really great development in Australia, especially coming on the back of such programs as Dynamo and Grasshopper that have sort of brought programming to the mainstream, which has really allowed us to work a lot more efficiently. So we're seeing a lot of traction coming from that. So that was sort of my take on it in Australia as well. So I think we have a lot in common through what we've experienced in our countries.
And Australia is obviously quite well known for the built group, which started as the RTC group, and
I think we've got the longest running Sydney, the Revit Sydney user group. I think was the first Revit user group in the world, from what I understand. So I still go to that one when it's on.
Very good.
Long history. And I was hoping to go to Built this year as well, but I think that's been delayed till 2021 now.
So even though that there's a long history in Australia of BIM, and do you find it still that it's not the majority of people are embracing this way of working?
Definitely. There's definitely like a bit of a them and us sort of mentality. I find when it comes to BIM, like we still haven't found that way to unify the thinking of project management styles and design styles and what BIM can do for them. And it's probably a bit of onus on both the BIM users and also on the non-BIM users to come together a bit more effectively. That there is probably more crossing of the streams happening now between all of these pieces that bring together a building and a project. But yeah, it's still catching up. We're still not there. Like we're nothing like, say, an industry like, say, Microsoft or Google, the sort of market that they occupy, where they've really sold over the market and the clients entirely. So yeah, we're not quite there yet for sure.
Yeah, which is strange because, if you think just about everybody engages with buildings or the built environment, or infrastructure. Everything you do involves the built environment. So it's not that the built environment isn't important to everybody. And then, most people need information about the built environment. So
yes, definitely.
When they're engaging it. So it's not as if people don't need information.
Yeah, it's strange.
And having information in a sort of static, paper-based, outdated, missing,
Yeah.
format is obviously having an impact on everybody in the way they do their jobs.
Yeah, from a productivity perspective, it definitely doesn't help, does it?
Yeah. So probably the area where people feel disengaged is the modeling piece. It just seems that, if you're a project manager or a quantity surveyor or a solicitor or a financer, whatever, that's the piece you think, well, that's got nothing to do with me.
Yeah. It's still definitely that mentality here as well, especially with a lot of project managers. Some of the builders are coming to the plate now, which is great. So we've got, like, say, Henson Youngkin. They're quite well known for getting their hands on the BIM process now when it comes to site. But yeah, we're still sort of waiting to see more of the middle players come to the plate, and I guess see more companies heavily engage the client when it comes to BIM as well. So sort of reverse brief quite convincingly. So there's definitely a bit of a challenge there for us.
One of our previous podcasts, one of the speakers said, it's at the moment it's too complicated and it's for people to engage. I mean, we need to take away the friction and make it easy.
Yeah, there's a lot of moving parts, isn't there?
Yeah. It's like ordering a flight online. It's like everybody can do it. It's not. It's complicated. It's complicated in the background. Obviously, engaging with.
I think some of that's the straggler effect that's we're seeing take hold now. Like, there are some leaders that are quite far ahead of the game now, and I am noticing there's a bit of a reactionary movement to sort of dismissing BIM just because some people are just so far behind the eight ball that how can you possibly catch up? So I know that sometimes that's like an attribution to the effect of the how can we ever keep up with this sort of mentality, or the dismissal of BIM, I guess.
So what excites you about this sector and what frustrates you about?
I mean, I guess for me, one of the biggest things that excites me about BIM, architecture, construction is systems. I'm a very systematic person. Sorry, that's my cat in the background. You might be able to hear him. But I'm very systematic. So I love seeing when a process has rigor behind it and people can apply themselves to it. So it may not necessarily be, say, like a model. It might be a meeting where everyone planned ahead really thoroughly and it all came together and everyone was hyper productive as a result. And I see a lot of that, in the AEC industry, and I've caused a lot of it as well on some projects I've worked on. I also like the idea that we're all sort of a little bit nerdy. Like I've sort of said that before. Sometimes I look around the company and I go, we're all sort of on computers, and I've always been a little bit of a nerd throughout my life, and I sort of suddenly realized we all came together and we all have a lot more in common than we like to think. Even like builders, like some of them, try to come across quite bravado-ish, and then you talk to them a bit more and you find out we all sort of liked the same things in high school. So I do like that aspect of it. There's definitely like a sense of community in the AEC industry, which is really interesting because obviously we're all very diverse, but you can sort of connect a lot of threads between while we're all sort of doing what we're doing, which I guess is to build the built environment. But in terms of frustrations, obviously, when processes don't work or when processes aren't embraced or allowed, that's always a big frustration, especially when, you put all this work into an idea and you set it up to go, and then maybe one person has a different idea and it's all dismissed and you get to watch it basically just crumble in front of your eyes. That we've all probably had that situation at least once in our careers, I'm sure, when we built something up to watch it fall. But I guess that's part of the challenge, and it sort of is another thing I like about the industry, that it's challenging. You never know what each day is going to hold. Every day is dynamic and different. So yeah, it's sort of a hate to love or a love to hate sort of relationship with what we do, I guess. Yeah. How about yourself? What do you find?
Well, the slow pace of change, I think, for me has been the most frustrating thing. We've been at this for 11 years now. Yeah,
and we're still talking about line weights.
Trying to help people embrace the BIM process, and and it's just watching people for themselves struggle through really complicated and slow and mundane and tedious tasks.
Even just the things that we shouldn't be struggling through, I find it quite frustrating whenever I get involved in a conversation about technical standards like line weights and naming conventions and what should we number our drawings. That's why I was so happy to start reading through the British National Annex and finally see someone just put a line in the sand and say, here it is.
Yeah, people spend an enormous amount of time arguing about things. You said, look, can we not just agree on something and move on?
Yeah, let's get this thing built.
Here's a standard, just use it. It's like, it's usable, and why do we have to have a 2-hour conversation about whether one code should be before another code? And
yeah, we almost care too much sometimes, don't we, about the sweat the small stuff.
You seem to be taking a direction in, with Dynamo and programming, and
Yep.
I mean, John Egan is also, with an architectural background, but he's gone into software development. And John, what do you think from your point of view?
I think you both, like, one of the main points that you both bring to the table is that doing BIM is too complicated. My father is construction industry. I've studied architecture. I've worked on the building sites. It's sort of in my blood, and I would think that it's really interesting about, you've just touched on standards, for instance. How's Australia adopting like ISO 19650 or information management standards, or is it? To my mind, it's like the hymn sheet for BIM, and because it has been standardized, it is now entered, a commodity stage of its, or as a technology. It's almost that commodity layer now that we can all just focus on and build our technology on top of. And I suppose what is Australia doing to build on top of it? Are they doing anything different, or are they kind of keeping it at arm's length and kind of approaching cautiously, or what's your take on that?
Probably the latter for the most part. I've seen it varies quite a lot across the board, depending on the company's maturity with BIM, or I guess how proactively they're trying to future-proof, or how open their ears are to the world. There are some major companies that are already, going for certification and trying to, get right on the front foot. Like I know some of the larger construction bodies like CIMIC, they've already been getting certified, and I believe Oricon, I think they were certified recently as well. So some companies are very much on board. They've seen the value in just standardizing the things that don't have any financial merit as a business to worry about, so they can get on with what actually makes them, unique as a design company. But there are other companies, especially the smaller, more traditional firms, that probably just, will wait until it's literally something they have to do before they put any money and time towards it, and continue to toil away at, something that's in place of it in the meantime. I guess the companies I've been through, there's been lots of variation, but I guess the common thing I've always had, luckily, at each company is that they have been aware. That's one good thing. Most companies know that there are ISOs and that they are, for the most part, worth following. They are more or less tried and tested. And while some of our software can't do 100% of the things they ask for, it's still worth doing the most we can and then contributing. I'd say probably the most development I see that maybe contributes to the ISOs comes through such organizations as Building Smart, where they have a lot of forums and events where people, get together and sort of brainstorm some of these challenges that probably make it back to the people actually developing them. That's probably the main sort of body that gets the communication across, sort of those nexus organizations that connect us all together, like a bit of an arterial network. But I guess personally, I've only really just got my head right around the ISOs about maybe 6 months ago. Before that, I sort of picked up bits and pieces, and, I can see the value in just getting on board with them, and rather than poo-pooing them because 2 things don't work out of 300, you just get on board with the 300 and you pick out the last 2 and discuss them in a forum instead. So yeah, definitely all for them. And I think it's a great move, and can't wait until we all stop arguing about the small things and, move forward as an industry.
I think one of the biggest challenges in adopting the standards is probably companies who, or organizations that have spent a lot of money and time developing conflicting standards.
Yeah, or they have infrastructure in their system that's already set up to handle it.
So they have a vested interest in sort of, perpetuating whatever they've done. Because I think if a company or an organization doesn't have any standards, then adopting a standard is obviously quite easy.
Obviously,
the work's done for you.
Yeah, I'd be a bit worried if a company had no standard at this point, but I guess occasionally We get surprised, don't we?
Well, they might have a standard, but it's not a standard in that if it's something that if they work their way and nobody else works their way, then it's not really it might be an internal standard, but it's not a standard in the sense.
I think one great thing that's really pushed everyone together a bit closer to talk about it is even just things like BIM 360, where you get exposed to the full DMS system and you sort of have to semi-rationalize how it all plays together. That's probably been quite good at proliferating some good practice as well when you work with the bigger companies and the smaller fish go, hey, we should probably just try their system because we know it works for them. So that's been probably one way I've seen it be successful as well. Like I know if people work with, say, Arif and Oricon and those bigger bodies that have pretty much standardized themselves to a T, it does tend to brush off quite a lot. So that's another way it sort of is moving. But yeah, it's moving slow and there's a lot of people that are probably ignorant to it as well, but still seeing a lot of good movement in the right direction now that we actually have a direction to follow, I guess.
Yeah, so do you think that you were going to see an increase in the number of SMEs adopting BIM, or do you think that the ISO 19650 and the proliferation of these standards will actually enable, I suppose they do reduce risk for the SME, and it is like a hymn book or the playbook for BIM? Do you think that? No,
I think anyone involved has got something to win out of a standardized system. I don't think anyone would ever say lose money from it unless they put a lot of time into it. So I think everyone involved in BIM has something to win out of it, even if it is just knowing what a report's called and finding the report at the crucial time because there's a system to follow. Like it could be something as simple as that, all the way down to, having an asset management strategy that translates into an FM period. There's a lot of different scales of win, but I think everyone's got something to win out of it. Yeah.
As somebody who's worked as a, BIM manager, a BIM coordinator, BIM consultant, do you feel people think that if they have you on board, then then the whole project's sorted? They've got the one expert, and that's all we need, and they don't really appreciate that BIM is a collaborative effort of many people.
You got it. That is one of my frustrations. Actually, you reminded me of that. Does happen. It was actually a big motivator to me eventually, sort of moving out into my own space to have the freedom to dictate what I do. Because you're right, sometimes those champions of BIM do become the custodians of the system as well. And it's a hard one because I guess a lot of architects and engineers and people, they didn't really, come into this for BIM. So I do sympathize to them, just like I don't like doing a 1 to 2 detail, for example. I guess they don't like reading an ISO that talks about what a document should be called or something like that. So I do sympathize to why it happens, but I guess, you're right. You do end up getting pigeonholed sometimes into a super role that takes on probably a few more hats than it should. Say a QMS manager that's not fully on board with the QMS standards. I know that happens in a lot of companies, and the BIM manager becomes like a mini QMS manager of sorts, and they know more about the document numbering system than anyone else does sometimes because they've had to develop the title block to house the parameters and all those sorts of tediums. So yeah, that does happen, and I won't lie, it has happened to me before. And
again, it's part of this thing about BIM being almost like a separate profession or not, but my background is I'm an architect. I suppose I always understood that. I mean, there were two parts to being an architect. One was to sort of dream up the ideas and, but then you had to communicate that idea to other people.
Yeah.
Because it's like and the communication of that idea was through information. So, I always understood the role of the architect as a communicator of an idea through a medium of information, and the better the information was, the better the idea was communicated.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. That's a fantastic definition. I think that's pretty much how I see it as well. That, we are essentially communicators. The idea is born in our mind's eye, and our job is to communicate it to the people to bring it into reality. So regardless of the vessel or the method, that's really our job. Yeah, so it's really just a culture shift, I think, for the most part, in that people are very used to doing things in a different way, and BIM isn't necessarily always what seems like the easiest way at first, because maybe it involves more work sometimes, maybe it involves less work sometimes. But I agree entirely with that definition. It's brilliant.
And maybe that's the kind of message ICT, which is, information and communication technology. It's this communication and what architects and engineers call design. Design is a process of coming up with an idea and putting it into a form of communication that other people can understand. Now,
yeah, exactly. They're very intertwined. Yeah.
I also noticed that most people can't read drawings. So I mean, the ability to read a drawing is something that you have to learn and go to school, college to
I almost put
understand.
it in it's the same boxes almost to me as someone who can't detect where north is at any time in their life. I've always been one of those people. I always know where north is, and I always get perplexed when I ask someone is it east or west, and they sort of start spinning around on the spot. And it's the same sort of thing. We think differently about the world that we live in. We sort of visually relate what we do to something in our mind's eye that people can't quite put themselves in, I guess I've noticed. So I don't know if it's exactly the same thing, but it's that phenomenon that some people can naturally look at something quite schematic or think in quite a schematic way and apply it to their reality.
Because we've been thinking a lot about this role of BIM coordinator, BIM manager, and if it is like the ISO is quite clear that on a particular project there'll be many BIM coordinators. Each company that's making a contribution to the project is meant to have a BIM coordinator.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a crucial role. Even when I was a BIM manager, I always relied very heavily on the BIM coordinators I worked with to really keep everything together. Because whilst the BIM manager can oversee and sort of overarch it all, holding it together, that you really need that glue to keep it running. So yeah, the BIM coordinators are essential, and I've been trying to sort of encourage more BIM coordinators in the industry, because we do have a lot of technicians that don't realize they can be coordinators. It's sort of like an innate skill that they don't recognize they have. So yeah, they're very crucial.
You mentioned earlier the silos and the fragmentation that's happened happens in the industry. And I suppose one of the things we're trying to do with the AEC Hive is create community. In other words, try and break down those silos and bring people together and talk to each other and share ideas. And do you find people find that difficult to share ideas? And
Yeah, sometimes. I think when money's involved, it's hard. I think when people can attach a profit to an idea, that's when it gets more difficult. Or when people can attach a amount of time that they've worked on something, they sort of don't want to share it. Like part of what I do on my channel is quite even difficult for me to do when I go and put a video together and I write a script. And someone just comes to me with a comment and says, give me the script. And like, there's this little voice in my head going, don't do it. They don't deserve it. But I'm like, no, everyone deserves it. It's information. Like, I'm just sharing an idea. The script isn't what's valuable. The idea is what's valuable. So I think that the idea that, things have to be held back if you've put too much time into it, that's very hard for a lot of people. And I had to sort of confront my own inherent sort of bias towards, the custodianship of ideas versus, I guess, material. So that's sort of part of what I did with my channel. I really tried to open it right up. Like, I mean, I've got a GitHub now where all the scripts and the presentations just go straight up in source format. And I think that's really the key. And I think I'm seeing a lot of other people start heading down that path, realizing that sometimes their time isn't the right thing to be charging for. Sometimes they are better off actually building meaningful connections out of people, and that's actually where true opportunity comes from. Like in my current business, most of my leads actually come to me through my channel. If anything, like what I've done's actually probably made me more successful than I would have been if I just showed some cool ideas and made people pay for them. So yeah, it's definitely a different way of thinking that we need.
What do you think, John? I know you have some views on this open source.
Yeah, no, I think it's really interesting what you're saying. Like, I've always been this debate amongst Dynamo and Grasshopper users around trying to monetize scripts and that kind of thing. And I think that what you're saying is a really nice middle ground there where, yes, you can share, but it's not the actual script that generates the value for the author. It's the further business and opportunity that comes as a result of that. Like, do you have, I suppose, from kind of being at the coalface in terms of, having to navigate this space in terms of, trying to feed yourself and build these hugely valuable things that can scripts essentially automate, and that you're automating in terms the receiver of the script can derive a lot of value from that. And
it's a great point. Yeah, I mean, you're right. There is a certain level of, I don't know what the word would be for it, selflessness. Occasionally there's, money now that is lost, and, I could just paywall everything I do. And I think that's why it is good that people do go into software development, because that's when I do see the worth in charging for things, because then they are packaging it into a very, clean and stable, usually bug-free solution to the problem. And that's where the real hard work lies. Like, I'm just getting into C# now as a programming language, and I can really see the amount of work required to package an idea into something as sophisticated as, say, like a plugin or a program. I think that's probably where maybe that I'll draw the line when I get to that point. Whereas for now, I guess, given I'm already working on top of an open source program by someone else, I almost feel like if I charge for a script, it would almost be disingenuous to the intent of the program that was provided to me in the first place. So it's almost to me a little bit like passing on the buck that was given to me, because if I didn't have Dynamo, I'd be still wasting a lot of my time, I guess, doing a lot of very manual, clunky things. But at the same time, you're right. I do have to eat. I do have to survive. So yeah, there is a line I guess I subconsciously drew in my head at some point, and I do know when the channel will sort of reach its peak, and I know when I'll probably look at things like putting up LinkedIn learning courses instead of just always putting out YouTube videos. But for now, I guess it was me just sort of giving back what I think the industry was owed, and what the industry probably needs as well. Just a bit of information to streamline the growth of learning that is available to, say, graduates and sometimes people in third world countries that can't afford more than just the cost of the internet to watch a video in the first place, let alone a course admission fee. So yeah, but there is a degree of selflessness to it that I had to sort of force upon myself. Yeah.
Do you think there's a lot of clunky, tedious things to solve? I mean, is there a big need for software development?
Yeah, I think there is, but I think
simplifying a lot of what has been very complex, like where 90% of the people in the industry can't engage with these technical processes because there's no tools available to them to. Yeah,
it's a bit of a double-edged sword that we have to be careful to sort of hold pretty evenly, because I'm seeing two sides of the paradigm. One is that there's a lot of people still inefficiently working, but at the same time, I know there's a lot of people going and programming and making things that other people have made. So there is a sort of aspect of redundancy on both sides of the coin, and we do have to be careful not to just code for the sake of coding, or code for the sake of putting up a little 20-second video showing how cool we are and how we solve the problem that no one else is going to solve because they don't have the script. So there is like an essence of redundancy that we do have to avoid as programmers, and that I think we're obligated to avoid as programmers, because what's the point unless it goes on to do something that saves more time than the time we put in. Yeah, so there is an essence of that there, but there's a lot of things that can be automated. There are some things I'll never do the way I did them again before I came to Dynamo. For example, placing views on sheets in the same position as one view. I haven't done that for 2 years because I found a way in Dynamo to do it, and now I just go and set up one view in the right spot on each sheet, and then just get an Excel sheet and direct all the views to where I need them. So it just depends on the task.
Yeah, just to continue on from that, like one of my pet peeves, I suppose, is actually observing people on Twitter talking about, oh, I've done this in C# and this in Python, and go and learn Python because it'll free you to do whatever you want. Yeah. And like you've identified, it is hugely challenging to learn a programming language. Yeah. And as someone that's been writing JavaScript for the last 3 or 4 years,
oh boy, that's hard.
Well, you say it's hard, but
to me, I guess,
for me, there was no other option at the time that I was learning. So, we were writing a lot of servers, and we were using Node.js. So, I was kind of strong-armed into that. And there are tools today, like, no-code tools and, let's say, low-code tools that, so just clarify there, like no-code as just drag and drop, configure workflows through UI, and then low code being a mix of that and
like APIs
you're able to write some code that, within each module, for instance, or so it requires your next level of
like a DLL or something you're drawing upon. Yeah.
I'm not a Windows developer. I'm so I'm Linux only, and so so I suppose like what I see is a lot of people saying, oh yeah, go and write some Python or go and write, and I just don't think that, like, in today's environment, I think that there is a lot of low code and no code solutions available that can actually allow people to create web apps just from dragging and dropping components. So you've like bubble.io as a no code solution, and then as a low code solution you have Node-RED. So that's like a visual programming environment quite similar to Dynamo, where you're dragging and dropping so there's like 3,000 different nodes you can choose from, all contributed by the community. You have a Slack group of about 7,000 people, all just, it's a really active environment. And like for me, what it allows, I suppose, like you identified at the start of the call, like Dynamo and Grasshopper bring programming to the masses. Yep. Like for me, Node-RED, and which is this low code solution that can be used to create fully functioning web applications. That is, like, I would always say, no, don't go and learn code, because it is quite difficult. Yep. Like you have to learn about, before you even start doing anything with code, you have to like understand
fundamental
everything
concepts.
From the fundamental concepts, everything from like the file system, your development environment, all of the your frameworks, your back end, your front end, and then you're into, like, if you worry about your deployment, like your DevOps, it's like it's
just one thing
it's it's a minefield. And I find for the construction industry especially, and people that are like architects, engineers, contractors, you're never going to have the time to become proficient in programming. And I can tell you, like, I believe that because I've been 3 or 4 years at it, and my first 2 years I spent practically 10 hours a day trying to become proficient at it. And I mean, like, I noticed you said, oh yeah, I'm learning C#. Now, can you tell me why you're learning C#?
Yeah, definitely.
Continue, because I find that, it's like, I get that you're to try and forecast your answer here, which probably defeats the whole point of this podcast.
Give me a try. Might prove you wrong.
Is that you're going to talk about optimizing an existing automation. And like, if this automation, such as the sheets that you've already identified, is automating to the point that it's 1,000 times faster, and writing it in code would make it 12,000 or 2,000 times
2 seconds instead of 1. What a second back
for a second. Yeah, exactly. So I'm really interested in your perspective there. And
it's a great question. Yeah, I mean, it leads on to one of sort of the points I always make about code, which is that, like, you sort of do need to know where to stop. Otherwise, you'll just be learning new things for the rest of your life, and before you know it, that's your life. So there is that idea that you really do need, like, your end goal in mind, or you need to keep revisiting what you're doing and saying, am I just doing this to just go, wow, that was so much faster, or look how cool this code is now. It's so much better than my first time, even though it does the same thing. And I think for me, I started with Dynamo just because it did what I needed it to do. I went on to Python from there just because it could do more than Dynamo could do, in that I could sort of reach further into the program's inner workings and do things that weren't necessarily developed yet. But there was that aspect of redundancy I had to avoid, because obviously there's a lot of other developers out there building their own custom packages, and there's no point in me just going and building something that someone else can do with their package unless it's fundamentally flawed and doesn't work, which is pretty rare. And I guess C# for me was just a way to reach just that little bit further again into the API, to access a few things that I couldn't get into that I need, just to automate some more advanced workflows. Say one I'm looking at the moment, for example, is how to automatically create an area plan with all the boundaries pre-drawn based on the rooms from a building, which is, it's not impossible to do using Dynamo, but to do it in Dynamo would probably take just as long for me to learn how the API could achieve it. So yeah, there's that idea of just sort of trading time spent on an idea versus time learning a way that is more efficient and will ultimately give a better solution that probably is, going to have less bugs and mean less people email me when I go and release it on my GitHub inevitably. So there's definitely that aspect of making sure that what you do isn't just for yourself or for the sake of saving 1 second that you're not going to use anyway. So yeah, I totally agree with that. I always tell people as well, you've got to sort of walk before you run. There's no point in, starting in C# if all you need to do is just do a basic workflow that Dynamo could achieve if you just spent a little bit of time playing with the fundamentals. Yeah, so I totally agree. It's a great point. A lot of coders need to think about it.
And coming back to the point earlier that the ultimate goal of all this is to communicate information,
yes,
or communicate an idea through information. I just feel that the ultimate communication tool that we have is the internet, because we can move information from one person to another person, that's in a different location. And so I just feel that at the moment we use a lot of desktop tools, to produce the information, and then once we've produced it, then we kind of push it out through the internet to other people, and then they use a desktop tool on the other side to do something with it.
To each other. Yeah.
But you would imagine that the future, people are going to say, well, why do we need these? Why do we need these desktop tools? Why can't we do these things, in the cloud, like in the internet?
Yeah, well, there's a few shifts like 360 Forge, for example. There's a few shifts in that direction.
Yeah. So so the building of tools, I imagine would move from building desktop tools to building web-based tools.
Well,
that must be the future of
I agree.
the AEC sector. And and then I think the other big move is that at the moment we have these very complicated desktop tools that do lots of things, and most people, and they're expensive, to be honest, and most people use maybe 5 or 10% of the features, the functionality of the tool. So, but they have to buy the whole, monster of the tool.
Autodesk is the perfect example, buying the entire AEC collection because it's only an extra $1,000 on top of what you already pay for Revit. So,
so you would imagine the future of tools and would be apps, like your phone, like you choose the apps you want to use that are important to you, and they just do a little thing, but they're connected.
Yeah, I guess to get to that point, we all need to find our little thing that we do as well. That's maybe a big challenge in it as well, really finding a way for all these roles to play in together to a seamless process, like, having a Facebook of a project, for example, where everyone has a predefined function and it all naturally chains together and the apps all work hand in hand to deliver a project, because that is what's led to a lot of our fragmentation, that we all use these proprietary programs in ignorance of what each other use. If an architect uses ArchiCAD and the engineer uses Autodesk programs, that there's surely going to be a debate about IFC somewhere in that team at some point about, why can't we use our Revit model, and, why can't you use our IFC files? And so I agree that like an app or a web-based solution is probably
and that's where, coming back to standards, that's where the standards are really important and help, because if you're building a little app, if it doesn't work with the standards of exchanging information with other apps, then you've just built another silo.
Exactly. Yeah.
and if there's a lot of work in between to try and take the information that you're producing and repurpose it to be used by another app, then you've sort of defeated the purpose as well. So,
Yeah, I have seen a bit of movement in I think Blender BIM, that they're trying to create an open BIM platform. I think it's still very early, but that's probably the closest thing I've seen to someone trying to sort of go against the proprietary nature of everything in the industry right now, and they're really focusing quite heavily on building true IFC data that can be worked with in other programs. But yeah, we're not quite there yet. But I agree, it's probably the future for us, I'd say.
It must be the biggest challenge at the moment is this manual translation of information between applications.
Oh yeah, I've literally built Dynamo scripts to manually transplant data between models before, just to get around the limitations of how we set things up. So it's a huge challenge.
All vendors seem to build their tools so they're at the center of the ecosystem, and they're the center of their users' worlds.
Well, they sort of let you in, don't they? Yeah.
That's natural, I suppose, if you're building a product.
Yeah. It's almost like ArchiCAD's built its own IFC prison and Revit's built its own anti-IFC prison.
To my mind, it's like we've a distributed landscape, or a landscape of distributed applications, but all the applications are architected so they're centralized to themselves, and they don't connect very well with one another. And like the work so I'm involved with the Building Smart Open CD API group, and the work that we're doing in that group is all geared towards abstracting the common concepts to each of these centralized platforms, so that we can have a common language to be able to share information between these systems. It's really, it's a huge,
You're trying to basically build a translator for all sorts of things, and of course they're always changing too. That's the fun part. But it's great that you're doing it, because someone has to. It's a brilliant initiative.
So it's in terms of it being a translator, like the onus is on us to derive a schema, or essentially something that's flexible enough that can cater for all the requirements of all these different systems working with one another. But the onus is also on the vendor themselves to build the mapping mechanism that will actually allow them connect.
I wish I saw more of that.
But what's really interesting then is that you have these competing business models belong to the different vendors. So there's almost an incentive to, keep these guys, or an incentive for the vendor themselves to, withdraw from engaging with this open standards initiative.
I like to sometimes compare it to Apple and Android, how the Apple chargers don't work in the Android phones, and everyone always has to go, who's got the right charger? And it's almost like saying, who's got the program that can open this model? It's the same sort of thing, really. Just it's human nature to build up walls so that people can't take our little piece of the pie. But it's very counterproductive. So it's a challenge.
That seems to be the biggest problem to my mind in AEC. BIM is fundamentally difficult to adopt because of limitations such as the ones we're discussing. And if they were easier, maybe a lot more people would come on board.
I have no doubt.
Like Ralph was alluding to earlier with the flight industry, they hide the complexity away. Now, to my mind, there's a huge correlation between removing this complexity and making it as easy as Skyscanner, let's say, for instance, for flights, and the adoption rate. So I predict that, the easier we make BIM for people, the more people will use it. And do you get the sense that we're almost looking at optimizing in our own little silos? So for instance, you're using Dynamo to optimize Grasa, or your use of Revit, or the tasks that you have to do in Revit. But that's fine. Autodesk are quite happy that you're doing that within their silo. But it's like we're all blind to the bigger problems. And yes, there's this ISO 19650 thing that we're like, oh yeah, that really works, but it's really difficult. So many people aren't going to begin to engage with it until we make it simpler. So it's like we're being held at ransom by these vendors who are just, keeping us in our silos. And
we're sort of polishing the prison bars, yeah. gold plating them, yeah. It's funny, isn't it? We're sort of locking ourselves in. Yeah, it is a bit of a challenge. I mean, there is a lot of interest I'm sort of having in some initiatives, even like really small ones that aren't necessarily opening up the floodgates, but they're sort of making opportunities between programs. Even like Rhino Inside, there's interesting little experiments. Always one directional, of course. It's never a collaboration, but there is just some funny little chinks in the armor showing sometimes, and seeing people get involved with that. But yeah, I mean, the bigger picture is trying to find a way to get these things all to work together ultimately. Yeah, it's a wicked problem. So yeah, I mean,
I think that working together has to be in the web. It can't be desktop anymore.
Yeah,
because we're all sitting in different locations, using different tools, different devices. So somehow that information has to come together in the web. And
I guess our current situation sort of shows it's upset more than ever. So yeah.
But there's two functions. So people will be feeding information into that web resource, if you like. Like when you book a flight, you're going to type your name in, your address, and the date you want to fly, and you're pushing some information into the web resource, and then it's sending you stuff back. Yes, it's confirmed. This is the date, and this is your reference number. And it doesn't matter whether you're using a phone or a laptop or Safari or Google Chrome, or that's almost irrelevant. You use the tools and the device that you prefer. But you're feeding the information into a central resource, and you're drawing information from a central resource, and
that's the goal.
And in the same way that Android and Apple sort of opened up their platforms for people to develop what they thought were useful apps. The market will tell if it's a useful app or not by whether it's being used.
Whether people buy it. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I guess the question too is when we open, if we do get to this utopic sort of centralized platform, I guess how do we protect the industry from falling into having 2 websites or 3 websites or 4 websites, and this one's a little bit cheaper, but it's going to become a subscription in 2 years. It's that way of protecting our industry as well from.
Again, I think the market will decide. We've ended up now with Android and Apple or smartphones, but they're still two. There were 3 or 4, and then the market decides which is most useful.
Yeah.
So I don't think we're going to completely avoid that. It would be nice to avoid it, but I don't think people will try all sorts of things.
So to continue on with that analogy, Rob, do you foresee that we're going to have an Apple and Android in the construction industry? Because what we're tending to see, and the patterns of evolution of these big platforms such as Autodesk, BIM 360, let's just choose them as an example here. They are focusing on the full life cycle of their eventual plan is to provide the backbone system that can provide all the features for the full life cycle from concept design through to operations. And if you look at their patterns of acquisition, that was their whole reason for PlanGrid. PlanGrid is now their construction site field component of that workflow, and they were essentially buying the features for the users to engage with this BIM 360 platform. So, if we take those guys, and then let's take Procore as well, because they're a good example. So they've started in construction, and now we see that they're starting to introduce BIM modules. So BIM modules being, their way of, I suppose, taking that first step into the design phase of the, so to make that bridge between construction and design.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, are we going to see these mega AEC corporations building mega platforms that provide this array
Well,
of tools?
you've seen it already, haven't you? Because you have Autodesk with their Forge model, which is their own proprietary format, and then you have Bentley, with the I model. So they're already working like that, but they're all working on proprietary formats.
They're developer tools. So what I'm talking.
But when you upload information to Forge, it's converting it into its own format.
Yeah.
And when you upload something to Bentley, it's using the I model format. So so you're already seeing the development of that, and those are just two, and I'm sure Trimble and
more to come.
Oracle will. So there's four, I suppose, big players already, or five maybe.
Probably many we don't know about too that are still on the horizon. Yeah.
I mean,
it's unfortunate that they haven't all settled on the IFC's format.
Yeah, they haven't worked towards it. I mean, ArchiCAD's pushed a little bit closer towards it, but Revit hasn't really taken it on as well as they could have. Yeah, I mean, I don't think we're ever going to see like a critical mass platform where everyone just goes, oh, we have to go to it. Like in some parts of the world, I think certain corporations are putting more effort into sort of winning the market. Like in Australia, I think Autodesk probably has, probably done a fair bit of work on trying to win the market here, and arguably they might have. But I know, like say in Europe, for example, it's a very different story. So yeah, I think as long as there's that little bit of competition around the world, we're never going to see like a single platform until someone forces something that's just that efficient and that logical that it has to be the way we do things. People just look at it and go, you know what, that's what we've been looking for. I can see that the risk is mitigated and the process works, and you can design well, you can build well, you can communicate well. That's probably what the tipping point will have to be.
Or you might get Google, Microsoft, or some big players saying.
I think we're more likely to see that, because if you look at the way that this is going to, well, to my mind, the way it's going to evolve is that, like, if you even look at the Nokia versus Apple, wasn't a war really, but we'll call it a war. Apple won because they brought out the platform, and the platform was, brought the developers to build these applications, and they created this feedback loop essentially between their customers and developers, and the value that platform grew, I suppose it grew exponentially, and like there was, and if we look at the likes of Procore and Egan, like we're partnered as BIM Launcher, we build integrations for these platforms. They're like, we are now really considering, as our future and our strategy with our business is to develop applications that sit on these app stores. And let's say, for instance, BIM Launcher sees a niche that we see it. So, for instance, this is actually happening. We see a niche where there's a BIM model validation gap in the app stores. And let's say, for instance, we only support Procore and Autodesk, and we're providing the value. Let's say, for instance, we're taking a 2-hour task down to a couple of minutes task, and that task then can involve all the different stakeholders in the project. So it's just huge, or it has huge efficiency gains.
Yeah.
Now, why would you go and use Trimble if this tool doesn't work with Trimble? Yeah. And I think that there's strong platform plays in place by Autodesk, Procore, and the leading project management systems. And I believe, like we've seen with Apple and Nokia, these guys will wipe out the need for the other guys.
Be a bit of a digital Game of Thrones, yeah.
And I think the reason Apple won the competition or whatever, one of the reasons, I suppose, is that they made the offering something that was really nice to use. Like it was usable, user-friendly. easy,
UX and
beautifully designed.
Yeah.
So like the value of design and thought and, user experience and often, I personally, I find that missing in a lot of software development is that,
I mean, that was a really
software
big
is developed by people that are, are very intelligent and, understand complex things. And they often design software, that would be useful for them. But when you get to people that are not at their level,
they don't know where to start.
And like Revit is an incredible tool. Like, but it's, most people feel daunted by the whole experience of trying to learn how to use it.
Yeah, I remember when I first used it and someone asked me to place a wall and I was terrified. I had no idea how to do it. I was like, what do I do?
Yeah.
Like, I've got a wall, now what? It was, there's a huge learning curve. Yeah. I mean, the UX is such a huge part of any sort of development, I think. Even with Dynamo, when I was trying to build scripts for my last company, putting user interfaces on the front of scripts and things like that was a much softer entry point for people. So it's very into any platform we develop,
Yeah, anyway, we've come to the hour there, guys.
Oh, wow. Got quite involved there. That was really fun, actually.
Do you have any last questions, John?
Gavin, would you consider using a low-code platform to build applications on top of platforms like BIM 360 and Procore and what other project management systems?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, with the right platform and the right knowledge I have of how to do it, it would seem like a logical thing because you're just building peripherals to something that already has a lot of use. I mean, you've sold me on the idea already. It's definitely, I think, the future to find a platform and enhance it and make it more valuable rather than, develop a whole new program that does something that, would be better built onto something already capable of doing other things as well. Yeah, it seems logical. So yeah, it would be.
I mean, low code is almost like Dynamo for the web, isn't it? So Dynamo is a visual programming thing for a desktop application.
No,
something like
so it's just so low code or Dynamo is a low code solution.
For a desktop, but it's interacting with a desktop application. Yeah.
That's
something like Node-RED is exactly, well, not exactly the same, but it's similar to Dynamo in that it has these blocks of code that you can visually assemble to interact with web applications. I mean, that's I'm not a coder, but I mean that's the way I understand.
Yeah, I mean I've definitely got homework, put it that way. Definitely got some things to look up and play with. Yeah.
Reach out to me, Gavin.
I will.
BIM Launcher. We have, if you look up the GitHub, BIM Launcher GitHub, we have a Node-RED getting started. So if you have Node.js installed on your machine, just clone that, npm install and npm node index, and away you go and start dragging and dropping. So
yeah, no, I'm definitely going to be doing that. So I'll reach out to you later after this and see if I can have a bit of a play with it and expand my horizons a little bit. Talk some more ideas in future, and probably if you find me a year down the track, I'm sure I'll be into a whole different thing again. My focus is always changing. So,
I suppose from the AEC Hive point of view, like what would be really cool to see is a community starting in Australia of people who are focused on innovation, focused on helping each other. We had our first event in Dublin, and what we did was we put a call out, and people set up their own little clusters or work groups, and they defined their own challenges so that whatever it was they wanted to investigate, and it was kind of like a hackathon, but I suppose slightly different in that people formed their teams,
sort of a granular hackathon,
before the event, and then everybody came together for a day. So we had 7 teams, about 50 people. Came together at an event space for a day, worked on their idea, and presented it then to the larger group. So that's the kind of model, and then obviously we let everybody know what people were doing. But it's to try and encourage people to participate in innovation because
you come together.
our feeling is innovation is not something that happens by accident. It's deliberate. It has to be thought about. You've got to form ideas. You've got to form groups of the right people who can work together, push the idea forward, and hopefully those ideas will eventually become products or services.
The best way to sanity check an idea is to make sure someone can tell you it's a good idea. So,
yeah.
I mean, I sort of low key, I sort of am already sort of doing a tiny bit of a roundup in Australia, trying to start at least putting the phone book together, so that at some point I can press, dial all, and we can all organise a session either down at the pub, or that's probably more the Australian environment for it, probably down at the pub, a couple of laptops out. No beers near the laptop, of course.
Well, if there's anything we can do to help that happen, please let us know, because that's exactly what we want to see in AEC Hive is people doing these things and sharing. So if you're doing something interesting and you'd like us to share that through the wider community, we're happy to do that as well. And
I mean, once we're all allowed out of our homes again, and I've got a bit of time to get my business back on its feet properly, running again, I can probably probably let you know what I'm up to then, and see if I can get some people together and we can trade some ideas, and maybe there'll be like some online mediums we can use. But I mean, I'm definitely keen to build collectives in the midterm. And then obviously long term, see if they sort of form a bigger picture. Yeah. And I think it's great work that you're doing, and we definitely need more of it in the industry. So definitely happy to help.
Okay, excellent. Any final words, Gavin?
Just thanks for having me on board. And I guess if anyone wants to get in touch with me, I'm pretty much available on nearly every social media platform except for Facebook and Instagram. And if you're ever looking for just some tutorials in BIM, feel free to check out my channel, the Aussie BIM Guru. And I take on topic requests too. So if you've got any ideas, just let me know. And I also just give people advice too on their careers. If anyone's looking for tips about what they should do, if you're struggling in this time trying to find whether you should move to another company or is it not the right time, I'd say probably not. Just if you've got any of those sort of questions, just reach out to me. I try to sort of be a bit of a mentor figure in the industry as well, especially for graduates or people just getting started. But aside from that, just thank you for having me on board, and had a really good time, and it was great to meet you, John. And meet you again, Ralph, in voice. And if I'm ever on your side of the world, I'll definitely let you know once I'm allowed to get on a plane again.
We'll buy you a Guinness.
Oh, I'll definitely take that.
Apparently, the Guinness in Ireland is different to any of the Guinness.
I have been told. Yeah, I look forward to trying real Guinness.
So thanks from my side, Gavin. Just want to say thanks very much. Really appreciate your time and your input. It was a great discussion, and we'll talk to you again.
Yeah, and I guess I'll finish off just by saying I hope everyone's safe out there, and everyone's staying productive and learning lots of new things, and everyone's in good health. Wish everyone the best.